Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and it is an honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. We're coming to the end of chapter 8, Perich Ches in Tanya, the last section, and continuing in this loving way, and I specifically emphasize that. You'll see in a minute why. How, like a father and mother, take care of their child from every blemish, from every scar, from every possible contamination or pollutant or toxin. The Alter Rebbe is describing in this chapter how we too have to take care of our neshama. And indeed, if there'd be a blemish, should be a mistake, should there be a transgression, there's a way of cleansing it. I received quite a few comments, both in writing and in emails as well as by phone, asking, as they're learning the chapter 8 with us every Saturday night, every Motzei Shabbos here in Tanya, that it can be very depressing when you start seeing the Alter Rebbe laying out the various punishments of Chibut HaKever, Kaf HaKela, the other punishments, Gehenim, as we discussed last week. And as much as I've emphasized, and I continue to emphasize, that the word punishment is not an accurate word, it's really cause and effect, still, it just shows you how embedded it is in our consciousness, especially growing up in a yeshiva, in a cheder, that when we learn about these ideas, it's about the punishments that will happen to you due to your transgressions. And it's critical to revisit that. And I just want to share a few words before we continue learning. We have to revisit that because the fact is, so much of our education is fear-based education. Fear-based. Fear of punishment, retribution, punitiveness. Just think of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the month of Elul. The dread of God enters into many people's hearts. Oh no, now I have to start being accountable. Now I have to start going soul searching and discovering all the sins that I did. And it creates a sense of demoralization, the guilt, the fear of what will happen to me due to my sins. And for many people, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is simply that. I won't even go as far as calling it superstition, even though it is for some people. But it's about the fear. And that type of joy, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, the type of fact, that feeling that we're more connected, is less prominent, unfortunately, in most of our circles. And that's simply due, not because that's accurate, because the way it's been taught, it's the easy way to teach children. You do this, you'll be punished. I mean, I remember going to yeshiva and how we were punished. You do this, you'll receive this punishment. You do that, another punishment. And what it ends up feeling is, yes, okay, sometimes it's a deterrent, maybe an incentive, but it doesn't leave you with a good taste. So when you start thinking about Torah and mitzvahs, and the schar and einish, the reward and punishment in Torah, you think of it also the same way. There's a principle in the sky who's waiting to strike us with lightning when we misbehave. But what's lacking is a fundamental axiom, a fundamental principle. Why did God create a world like that? Is he simply, God forbid, an achzer, cruel, wants to punish people? Create a world with human beings that are flawed, and we're given a yetzer hara. Yes, we're also given a yetzer tov. We have a divine soul and we have an animal soul, as he explains in Tanya. But we also have an animal soul, and we will be tempted. As a matter of fact, the Gemara even says it's from the things that God regrets, creating the yetzer hara, whatever the explanation may be. Because he did give us the se'ir shebe'isa that causes us to transgress. It doesn't force us to do so, but it allows the situation. We live in a world where the divine is concealed. And then he comes and punishes us. What's the benefit of that? There are people who are just simply they're psychopaths or sociopaths, cruel people. So they set up a situation and then they like to be cruel. God forbid to say that about God, even though there's some people have that perception. So even before you open up a Tanya, or you open up any sefer in Torah, Chassidus especially, there has to be stated a very important Hagdama. Bereshis bara lekimus hashamayim v'sa'aretz. God created heaven and earth because out of love. The expression is, etzem hatev, God is fundamental, core love, u'meteva hatev lehetiv. And the nature of love is to be loving. We call Torah's chesed, a Torah of kindness. The entire Torah came to create peace, harmony in this world. Its paths are paths of sweet paths, of pleasant paths, noyam. And all its roads are shalom, are peaceful. These are fundamentals that you must know. So then the question is, why are there these negative things? Why are there curses in the Torah? Why does it tell us if you don't do this, so and so will happen? And the answer is because it's cause and effect. It's actually a blessing. There's the question asked on the Pasha, behold, I give you today, I present to you today, Neisen, the blessing and the opposite of blessing. So the question is asked, Neisen, Neisen is from the word matana, gift. When you give a gift, you're giving it with a pleasant eye. So one thing is, okay, the gift of blessing. Why are you telling me that the gift of the opposite of blessing is also a gift? The answer is because the Torah as a blessing is telling you, you're traveling on a road. It's just as important gift, blessing, to know what road to go on than to know what not to go on. Let's say you're opening up a business or you want to start a new venture. So an experienced person will tell you, do this, don't do that. Which is more important? They're equally important because you also don't want to make mistakes. You don't have to go through the trial and error that someone already learned from. That's number one. Number two, there are consequences when a person makes a mistake. Consequences is not a punishment. Consequences is a blessing. To know that when you do that, something will happen. Why is there consequence? Why when a person puts his hand in fire, does the hand get burned? Because the hand is trying to protect itself. So it burns on the outer levels in order to protect the inner organs. Every pain, everything that happens negatively is the body's response to try to protect itself. So when you think of it that way, it's actually an act of love that we're being told all the different ways to protect the pure soul from any negative toxins, any negative behavior. And when there is one, it's a blessing to know how you can cleanse it. You don't want to find out, oh, there's a blemish on this garment and I have to throw it out. Or something happened and now it's damaged. You want to know that you can correct. That's the whole point of Elul and Tishrei. Tshuva, that you have the power to correct. After the Jews built the golden calf, Moshe went up on the mountain. It was a terrible sin. But he begged and gained forgiveness. And Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, because it's the Day of Atonement, Salachti Kidvarecha. So this is an introduction that's vital when learning a chapter like chapter 8, chapter 7, especially chapter 8, because we talk about all the blemishes and even things you say, 1 second here. It's so difficult life as it is. Now you tell me I say one Dvarim B'Telim, something that was not Torah, and it never goes away. I have to deal with it. Like he says, that even afterwards there's a reshim, there's some type of trace, and we need chibut hakeva, we need to cleanse it out. So you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it, how terrible things are. You can look at it, no. The Alter Rebbe is teaching us the beauty of a soul, the beauty of a neshama, and how we have to take care to protect it in the best possible way. It's the highest possible standard. Imagine he didn't have Perek Ches in Tanya. And you'd hear about the beautiful things of the divine soul we learned in chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4. Chapter 5. It's only in chapter 6 he started talking about klipa, the umazeh, the other side. Imagine we only talk the beautiful parts. But life, reality is, not everything's going to always be beautiful. And we won't know what to deal with it. What will happen if someone makes a mistake? Deliberate, inadvertent, and a blemish. Someone hurts you or you hurt somebody. What do we do with that? Just say, okay, let's hope for the best, everything will be great. Says the Alter Rebbe, no. I will address that as well. That's part of life. Part of life is another side. There's the darker side of life. And there's a reason for that. As we'll learn later in Tanya, because the Eibishter wants a dira b'tachtenim in a world like ours, where there is concealment and the possibility to make mistakes, and we should learn how to not make mistakes, avoid it, or how to correct it once a mistake is made. As he explained in chapter 7, that either you avoid it, or when Mashiach comes, everything will be cleansed, or through tshuva. Tshuva ma'ava, the different levels of tshuva that we learned. But the point is, if you think of it that way, then it's actually covering a whole part of life, all the negative aspects of life. What do we do with that? So number one, we understand now that the standard is so beautiful. The soul is such a beautiful soul. Yes, every blemish counts. We're not going to say, you know what, you're a simple person. It's all right. If you don't start tzaddik, okay, there we have to worry about Revav al Beged Talmid Chacham. Every little blemish, every stain matters. But you're a simple person. Says the Alter Rebbe, no, you're not a simple person. You're a great soul. And just as a blemish counts for a great person, like a great soul, like a tzaddik, it also counts for you. Obviously, we understand that a person of a lower soul level the challenges may be greater challenges. Of course it's understood, but we're not going to lower the standard. I'm not going to say because of my child, this child maybe doesn't have the same resources as the tzaddik in my life. I'm going to lower the standard. No, the standard is high. And there's a way to repair and correct. All that's coming from a loving place. When you think of it from that perspective, with that lens, then read the whole chapter, and the chapter should be read very differently. Then you're reading the chapter, how do we clean up? How do we clean up a home, a beautiful palace, a beautiful soul? How do we get rid of the dust? So the Eibishter gave us a whole bunch of methods. Chibur tarkever, kaf hakela, chibur tarkever for the body, kaf hakela for the soul, gehenim shel shela, gehenim shel eish. All to deal with, whether it's dealing with things that come from passion and desire, fiery desires, or it comes from atzlus, from laziness and complacency and apathy. Everything has a tikkun. It would be like saying we have illness in this world. We know that. But do you have a cure? Magdim refuah lamaka. We're given the healing before the illness. So we're given a way to heal, first to immunize ourselves, and then to heal should there, God forbid, be a transgression. So with that introduction, let's go back now. So what we've been learning here is, after explaining the two types of klippas nega, more the neutral material activities in this world, and shalosh klippas atmei, the things that are forbidden. Obviously, following after we learned about gedusha, mitzvah, the things that are obligate, the holy things that we do that bring holiness and godliness into this world. There are things that conceal godliness and push away the divine truth of existence. And then there's the neutral in between that can go either way. So the Alter Rebbe in chapter 8 is talking about even the things that are permitted have to be also taken great care to make sure they're directed toward a higher purpose. So he goes through things, firstly, food, even when we eat something kosher, and it's not for pure intentions, what has to happen there, the blemish it creates and how you can heal from that. Then he moved from that to dibur, that's maisa, action. Words, the words we use. Even when it's allowed, but it's words that are not Torah, wasted words, that needs to be prevented. And then, if, God forbid, somebody speaks such words, there's a way of cleansing from that as well, as we learned. Then there's words that go even further, dvarim asurim, diburim asurim, things that are not permitted, forbidden words. And what has to happen there? Like Litzonis, Lashon Hara, as he spoke about. So there you have not just kaf hakela, which is just enough to clean out the dust from regular nonsensical or worthless or wasted words. You need more than that. You need Gehenim. You need the cleansing and the purification that comes from Gehenim. And then about someone who could learn Torah, instead does Zivrei Torah. That was the last thing we learned. So all the effects, negative effects that has, and how we cleanse from that. And now the Alter Rebbe moves to the end of the Perek. He's going to move now. What about things in the mind? Moichin, machshava. But here he's going to do like an interface from words, and he's going to go to thought. And he's going to introduce the concept of wisdom that is not Torah, which is interesting. Because there are wisdoms in this world that are called secular wisdom. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, he's doing chochmas ha'umes, which literally means secular wisdom, wisdom of the nations. So let's explain what that means before we read inside. Now, this is critical to understand. Keep in mind again the introduction I gave, which is that we look at everything from the perspective of the divine. God, a pure God, created a universe, an impure universe, a universe that has its own independent consciousness. Therefore, we have free will, has choice to choose to either follow the purpose for which we were created or not to follow it. Which means we have our own ego and our self-interest. The goal is to direct all that as well and to recognize that there's a higher force, there's God within our lives. And Torah Mitzvahs helps us do that. Now, there are things that everybody can agree and understand are destructive. When you behave in self-interest and you hurt somebody else in the process, everybody understands how negative that is. But what about if you're doing something, you're reading something that's connected to intelligence? We're not talking about wasted words, worthlessness, nonsense. Mathematics, science. We're not talking about anything that's forbidden. How do we look at that? So you think, well, it's not so bad. It's part of what God created. It's understanding God's mind, as many scientists will say. We're trying to understand the logic and the systems and the laws of nature that God embedded into existence. And yet, it's still God's wisdom within existence. It's not God's wisdom as in Torah, which is what? Which tells us why the world was created. When you study math, or geography, or science, we're not talking about anything that is forbidden. What are you studying about? How the world works. It's called Chochmas Ha'elam. It's definitely part of God's plan. If you study the science of the movement of celestial bodies, the sun and the moon and the stars, astronomy, or you study physics, you're studying about the way God created the world, or medicine, the DNA and the cellular structure and biology and chemistry and so on. It's all about how God created the world. What you don't learn from that is, why did God create it? So you're studying the dynamics of the machine itself, which is definitely valuable. It's understanding God and God's mind. But you're not understanding how it should be used. That's why science is morally neutral. It won't tell you, it'll tell you this is the physics of subatomic particles, quantum mechanics. Or biology will teach you about the different aspects of how different organs or limbs work, or the biology of nature. Someone will say, okay, so what am I supposed to do now? What is considered to be ethical or not ethical? Science will say that's not the world of science. That's the world of Torah, where God tells us, why did I create it all? What's the purpose? How do you use it to elevate it all toward higher purpose? So if you have a choice which one to study, they both have value. But ultimately, you can't compare the two. Because one is like studying the rules of how to use a screwdriver and a hammer and other tools and instruments. And the other is what to use it for, how to build a home with it, how to build a better life, how to build a better world. So in the context of creating a pure world that is aligned with God's purpose, we have to realize that when you study science, when you study secular wisdom, though it's wisdom, and we're not talking about something, again, that's forbidden, we'll address that momentarily. Nevertheless, if at the same time you could be studying with the purpose of using it all, that is definitely superior. And therefore, the fact that you're studying about existence, even though it's a divine existence created by God, but it's how God manifests within nature. And that's why you see, when you study science, or you study any of the secular wisdom, it's studying about you and about the world. So it's more about the yesh, it's more about our existence. So it makes us more significant. That's why it's easy to be arrogant in that process. You don't have to be. There are many humble scientists. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But it's possible. When you're studying about God's purpose, you're not studying about you and your ego and your life. You're not studying about what makes you tick. You're studying about something greater than you are. Who created you? Raise your eyes to heaven and see who created all of this. That creates what we call bittul. So that's why Chochmas Chetzenius or Chochmas Ha'elam or Chochmas Ha'umis. And Umis here doesn't mean the wisdom of the nations. It could mean all nations. It means all people. The wisdom of people. Meaning the wisdom that human beings, Chochma Bagoyim Tamen, we say, the wisdom that human beings have discovered in understanding God, understanding how God creates this world. But it's still focused on the creation, not on the creator. Understanding his handiwork, understanding his design. And relative to Torah, that is still part of understanding the yesh of this world. Says the Alter Rebbe now. So let's learn inside now. He says like this. V'chein, after he finished what he spoke about Dvorim B'Telim and all its effects, he says, V'chein ha'esek b'chochmas, so you see now chochmas. V'chein ha'esek b'chochmas u'mes evdei gelulim. That's in the original Tanya, or chochmas. V'chein ha'esek b'chochmas u'mes elam. He says, B'chlal dvarim b'telim yechshav, yechoshev. They're also considered, so a person who's studying, even permitted, non-heretical forms of secular wisdom, is considered yechoshev le'inyan oven bittul Torah. K'meshakasa b'hilchos Talmud Torah. It's considered a sinful neglect of Torah study, tantamount to worthless discussion. Like he writes, like stated, in the laws of Talmud Torah, in the laws of Torah study. The Alter Rebbe has Hilchos Talmud Torah, Peir Gimel, Halacha Zayin. He brings it from Sifri in Dvorim, Vav Zayin. Why? We just spoke, elaborated that you're studying something, that you're studying God's mind. But you're studying God's mind as it's manifest, as I said, in the machine. You're studying the machine. And yes, you acknowledge that it's coming from God. When you study Torah, you're understanding God. Not just what God created, but God himself. So in the higher standard that we're looking for here, that's ultimately what gives you focus in life. You can study the machines from today till tomorrow and know the universe very well, but you may never know why you're here in this world. So that's why it's called Bittul Torah. What he says here, it's called Dvorim B'Telim. In comparison to Bittul Torah. What does that mean? You're not studying something you're not permitted. There are things you're not allowed to study. There are heretical things and so on. Because the Torah says, V'debarta bam. The words that you use should be in Torah. Because that should be your focus. The focus should be Avedus Hashem, Ani Nivreisi El Shamash Keni, serving God. So we're not talking about something that's not forbidden. We're talking about things that have value. So the only reason that they're considered here Dvarim B'Telim is because they're not Torah. So they have wisdom, but still, according to this halacha, they're considered Dvarim B'Telim. So as such, then it has all the three faults that we spoke about earlier. The fault of doing something that is not purely about your soul and your soul's purpose. 2, the sin of Bittul Torah, which we spoke about as a very strong, not learning Torah, which is our water, our sustenance. And 3rd, the general Mitzvah sesa, the bittul of a mitzvah sesa, that you're not doing a positive mitzvah, which we spoke about. And each one had a way of tikkun. The blemish of words that are dvorim betelem compared to Torah is through, we said, kaf hakel is like cleaning out the dust. Bittul Torah says, einshim chemurim, intense cleansing necessary, and the lack of mitzvah sesa, he said, was like Gehenim Shoshala, because it's coming from a certain laziness, a certain atzlus. So all that applies. That's the v'chein, applies also to someone who's oisik b'chachmas u'mis ha'elam. Now, let's spell this out. A person can study secular wisdom, and it should be completely focused on godliness. But you also see something else. You can see an arrogance emerge. Look at the worst possible scenario. You have doctors, scientists, let's talk in the time of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, who used science actually to destroy people. How's that possible? If science and medicine is all part of wisdom, which is all part of God, how God created the world, how could someone use it for the opposite? Because it's concealed. As we'll learn a little later about Shviras HaKelim, wisdom, even divine wisdom, as it comes down into this world, can get concealed. To the point that you can say, I'm a self-made person. Everything I know is my own. Yes, some will attribute it to God, but not necessarily. You could easily say, and it makes you feel even superior. So who's more destructive person, potentially? Someone that is just acting out of a crime of passion, or a crime that is premeditated, that's coming from a scientific mind? Far more a scientific mind, and we're going to learn about that contamination of the mind. The point I want to make here is, why is he saying such a statement? Because when you learn Torah, on the other hand, all you're learning about is God. What God, about God himself, what he wants from us, and the mitzvahs to connect to him. And by connecting to him, it's about sublimating yourself and moving away from your own ego to serve something greater. Now you'll say, one second, there are people that learn Torah that are also arrogant in the name of Torah. Have heard people? Yes, Torah could also be samovis, because it could also be trapped. But the Torah itself, Torah itself does not accept, does not retain, and does not absorb impurities. It's the person. Any person has free will. It could be a novel b'reshus Torah, an obnoxious person in the name of Torah. But when it comes to science, you can use the science itself. There, you're not even talking about God, possibly. And as a result, what takes over? It's me. If a person studies Torah that way, in a way they're doing the same thing, but Torah is talking about God. And therefore, there is always redemption in that. So compared to learning Torah, learning secular wisdom is considered bittul Torah, dvarim betelem, and as such, creates the blemish that's possible. But we'll talk more about this in the next class, because the fact is, he's going to explain to Alter Rebbe that you could use chachmas ha'elam, secular wisdom, for kedusha too. It's klippas nega, remember. It's not sholosh klippas atmeis. But we'll talk about that in the next year. Everyone have a good week. Go to TanyaApplied.com, where this and all the classes are archived. You can also ask any questions. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.